The acrid smell of grease and burnt metal had become the signature scent of Michael's life. It clung to his clothes, worked its way deep under his fingernails, and haunted even his dreams. This afternoon was no exception. Michael lay under the chassis of an old Ford F-150, his face smeared with grime trying to tighten a rusted bolt. The weak fluorescent light from the rented workshop's ceiling cast a dim halo around his gaunt frame. Outside the town of Havenwood, Ohio was sinking into dusk, carrying the bleakness of a place forgotten by industry. Michael once had bigger dreams. He had been the owner of an auto parts store, a promising young entrepreneur. But fire had taken it all. Not just once, but twice. The first time they called it an electrical accident. The second time, after he had poured his last pennies into rebuilding the flames, erupted mysteriously again, turning everything to ash. With his dream of an import parts empire shattered, Michael decided no one could burn his hands and his knowledge. He became a mechanic. But even as a good mechanic, perhaps the best in Havenwood, Michael was still failing. David, his old apprentice, now owned a large, gleaming garage in the center of town. David had a house in the suburbs, 2 beautiful children, and a brand-new pickup truck. Sometimes David would even send the most troublesome cars to Michael, knowing only he could fix them. Michael would repair them, receive a few meager dollars, and then watch David drive away in his wealth. The bitterness was a tumor growing in his chest, suffocating him each night. His wife Sarah and their 5-year-old son Leo were the only reasons he kept trying. Suddenly a loud bang erupted from the truck's engine, followed by a shower of blue sparks. Startled, Michael rolled out from under the vehicle, coughing violently in the black smoke. Another failure. The truck had been here all week, and he still couldn't find the problem. Helplessness boiled over. He threw the wrench hard against the concrete floor, the clang of metal echoing sharply in the silence. "Damn it!" he roared. He scrambled to his feet, not bothering to clean up, and stormed out of the workshop, running toward his neighborhood. He couldn't take it for another second. Sarah was in their small apartment, the light from her old sewing machine illuminating her beautiful but sad face. She was mending a dress for a customer, while Leo sat on the floor coloring in a tattered book. The boy didn't go to preschool. They couldn't afford a private one, and Michael didn't want his son in an underfunded public school where he feared his future would be neglected. So Sarah homeschooled him. The door burst open and Michael stormed in like a hurricane, his face pale with panic. "Pack up! Close the shop!" he said, his voice urgent. "We have to go home right now. Hurry!" He snatched Leo into his arms, startling the boy so much he dropped his box of crayons. Sarah, deeply worried, quickly turned off the sewing machine and gathered their things. "What's wrong, honey? You're scaring me," she asked, her voice trembling. "Did something happen?" "It's nothing," Michael replied, but his eyes told a different story. "Just hurry, please." A few minutes later, they were in their cramped apartment. Michael set Leo down on the couch and turned to face Sarah, his eyes burning with a strange fire, a mixture of desperation and crazed determination. "Sarah," he began, his voice serious, "I'm tired. I'm so tired of this miserable, poor life. God knows I've tried everything. I work hard. I pray I'm a good person, but nothing ever changes. I don't know what else to do." Sarah stepped forward, gently placing a hand on his shoulder. "I know, my love. I know it isn't easy, but let's keep trusting in God. His timing is always best. I'm sure He will help us soon." "I'm tired of waiting, Sarah. Tired of hoping for nothing." Michael brushed her hand away. "I called you home to tell you that tomorrow morning I'm going with David. We're going to see someone who can solve all our problems, someone who can help us get rich. Someone— What do you mean?" Sarah frowned. "David told me not to tell anyone, but I can't hide anything from you," Michael continued, his voice dropping to a whisper. "He went to see a man in the mountains, a man who can perform rituals. That's how David got everything." The color drained from Sarah's face. "Rituals? Michael, are you talking about some kind of money ritual?" "No, it can't be. Is that how David got rich?" She backed away, her eyes wide with horror. "Oh my God, we're doomed. Are you talking about dark magic?" Keep your voice down, Michael hissed, glancing at the window. Do you want the whole neighborhood to hear? Aren't you tired of being poor Sarah? For so long I thought David was just lucky. But yesterday when I went to beg him for help, he told me the truth. Michael, don't you know, those things always come with a terrible price, Sarah sobbed. The devil never gives anything for free. They might ask for a human sacrifice. Nobody is asking for human blood, Michael insisted. David is my best friend. I trust him. He said the man only asked for the blood of a large bull. He didn't kill anyone. Do you remember the day David threw that huge party and slaughtered a bull just 3 months after their wedding? The day I told you it was crazy to spend so much money. Well, that was the day he used the bull's blood for the ritual. And look, it's been almost 2 years. Did his wife die? Are his children okay? No one was harmed. He just used a bull's blood, and he even promised to lend me the money to buy one. I can pay him back when we're rich. That night Sarah didn't sleep. She tossed and turned thinking about Michael's words. A part of her was relieved that her husband had trusted her enough to tell her the truth. But another part was terrified. She decided she would go with him. Not just because he had confided in her, but because she wanted to be there just in case the man demanded a human life. She didn't want her husband to sacrifice her without her knowledge. The next morning they left Leo with a neighbor and followed David's truck in their own beat-up pickup. They left Havenwood behind, driving deep into the countryside, where paved roads gave way to muddy dirt tracks. Finally, they stopped in front of a secluded log cabin nestled in the middle of a dense forest. An old man with a long white beard and deep-set eyes came out to greet them. He was called the Elder. Inside the cabin, the air was thick with the scent of dried herbs and incense smoke. The Elder performed a few rituals, chanting in an ancient language they couldn't understand. Then suddenly he stopped, opened his eyes, and looked directly at Michael. He mumbled, his voice deep and resonant. My children, the poverty in your bloodline is heavy. The spirits of this land demand the blood of the most precious person in your lives. Michael froze. What? But I thought it didn't require human blood. He stammered, terror written all over his face. David, standing beside him, couldn't meet his friend's eyes. If I had told you the whole truth, you wouldn't have agreed to come, he whispered. David, you've killed me, Michael screamed, feeling the ground crumble beneath him. He looked at Sarah, who had started to sob. The person he loved most in the world was her, and he was the person she loved most. Elder, Michael asked in desperation, we're both here. So, who will be used? The Elder shook his head slowly, his eyes scanning them both before settling. I said the one you both love most, and that is not you, nor is it her. Silence fell over the room. Michael and Sarah looked at each other, their confusion and fear mounting. You, my children, the Elder declared, his voice devoid of emotion. Love your son more than anything in this world. He paused for a second, letting his words sink in. The spirits demand his blood. A wild, unearthly scream tore through the silence of the cabin. It was Sarah. It was no longer a human sound, but the cry of a cornered animal desperately protecting its young. She grabbed her purse, stumbled backward, her eyes fixed on the Elder as if he were the devil incarnate. No, never, she shrieked, then turned and fled out the door. Sarah, wait for me, Michael yelled, snapping out of his stupor. He rushed after her, leaving David stammering apologies to the mysterious man. Sarah heard nothing. She ran frantically down the dirt path, stumbling, getting up, and running again. She reached the old truck, her hands shaking so badly she couldn't get the key in the ignition. Michael caught up, grabbing her by the shoulders. Sarah, calm down. Get off me, she screamed, struggling wildly. Don't touch me. You're a monster. Finally, she got the door open, slid into the driver's seat, and locked it. Michael pounded on the window, but she just shook her head, tears streaming down her face. David pulled up beside them, rolling down his window. Leave her be, Michael. Get in my truck. Let's go home. The ride back to Havenwood was silent, filled only with Sarah's sobs and the tired growl of the engine. When they reached their apartment building, she bolted from the truck, ran up the stairs, and burst into their home. Michael entered right after witnessing a heartbreaking scene. Sarah was clutching Leo, holding him so tightly the boy squirmed. She was crying not silent tears, but violent body-shaking sobs. She was crying for lost innocence, for shattered safety, and for the monster her husband was becoming. The following days were a living hell. Sarah never left Leo's side. Wherever he went, she followed. When he slept, she sat by his bed, watching over him. She didn't speak to Michael. She didn't look at him. To her, he no longer existed. Her silence was more terrifying than any scream. It was a wall of ice, a wordless condemnation. Their tiny apartment became suffocating, the air thick with anger, fear, and resentment. A week later, Michael couldn't take it anymore. He waited until Leo was fast asleep and approached Sarah, who was sitting in the darkness of the living room. "Sarah, we can't go on like this," he began, his voice pleading. "Please talk to me." She remained silent, her eyes staring into space. "Listen," he said, lowering his voice. We can have other children. Think of Leo as a sacrifice for us and for our future children. So they'll never have to know what poverty is." Sarah turned to look at him, her eyes blazing with hatred. "Do you know how long we waited to have Leo?" She whispered, her voice hoarse from crying. "Do you remember what the doctor said? That I might never be able to have another child. And now you want me to sacrifice the only one I have. How will you sleep at night knowing you murdered your own son?" "No, Sarah. If we do this, we can afford the best medical treatments. I promise you, we'll have as many kids as you want," he said desperately. And it's not like we're doing it with our own hands. We just have to take his picture to the elder with a bull. After a few chants, we'll throw a party. That night our son will fall asleep and never wake up. It will be a peaceful, painless death. No one will ever know. Please, Sarah. I'm begging you." Silence fell. Then Michael continued his words like a knife to her heart. "David told me," he whispered. "That's what he did, with his twin sister." Sarah's jaw dropped in horror. "She died of sudden meningitis, remember?" Michael went on. "No one suspected a thing, and she didn't suffer. That was the price for David's wealth." Sarah couldn't believe her ears. She stood up, backing away from him, looking at him as if he were a total stranger. But 2 weeks later, she walked into the bedroom to find him holding a cup of pale green liquid. The sweet chemical smell of antifreeze hit her nostrils. "Michael, what are you doing?" she screamed, rushing forward and knocking the cup from his hand. The liquid spilled across the floor. "If you don't want us to use our son, then let me die," he said, crocodile tears rolling down his cheeks. "I'd rather be dead than continue to rot in this poverty." From that day on, Michael changed completely. He became a ghost in his own home. He didn't speak, didn't eat. He would sit for hours by the window staring out with an empty gaze. Whenever Sarah passed by, he would mutter mournful phrases. "My life is useless. I'm a failure. I can't provide for my family." He didn't yell or threaten. He was simply dying in front of her, and he made sure she knew it was her fault. He turned his suffering into a weapon, torturing her day after day with guilt. Sarah began to break. She couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. The image of Michael with the cup of antifreeze and the look of agony on his face haunted her. She felt torn between the two greatest loves of her life: save her son and watch her husband self-destruct, or save her husband and sacrifice the most precious thing she had. Finally, late one evening, her resistance shattered. She walked into the living room where Michael was sitting in the dark as usual. Tears streamed down her gaunt face. "All right," she whispered, her voice broken. "Let's do it." Michael looked up, a flicker of light in his eyes. The world outside had lost its color, sound, and meaning. All that remained was a blanket of ash gray. The elder was waiting. The ritual was frighteningly quick. Michael gave him the latest photo of Leo, a picture of the boy smiling brightly in the park, his eyes sparkling with innocent joy. Sarah had to turn away. The elder mumbled incomprehensible incantations over the bull, sprinkling an herbal water on its head. Then he looked at Michael and nodded. "It is done. Tonight, kill the animal and feast. Celebrate the prosperity that is to come." On the way back, Michael broke the silence. "We need to take Leo to your mother's house," he said, his tone as flat as if discussing the weather. "Just for one night. I'll tell her we have an emergency." The trap had been sprung. All exits were sealed. That afternoon, Sarah packed a small bag for Leo. She included his favorite dinosaur pajamas, his worn teddy bear named Barnaby, and a comic book. Every action felt like a knife twisting in her heart. This was the last time she would pack a bag for her son. She was packing for his final journey. When Michael arrived with the truck, Sarah carried Leo outside. She held him tight, inhaling the scent of his hair, trying to memorize every detail of his angelic face. "Be a good boy, my love," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Listen to Grandma. Mommy loves you so, so much." Leo, innocent and unaware, wrapped his arms around his mother's neck. "I love you too, Mommy. Will you pick me up tomorrow?" "Of course, sweetie." Sarah lied, her heart shattering into a million pieces. She watched the truck until it disappeared around the corner. A part of her soul went with it. When Michael returned, the party had already started. He had asked David and a few other friends to help slaughter the bull. The smell of barbecue filled the apartment complex. Loud music blared from a portable speaker. Neighbors gathered in the small courtyard behind the building, laughing, drinking beer, and wondering why the poorest family in the complex was suddenly throwing such a lavish party. Michael played the perfect host. He moved through the crowd, clapping one person on the shoulder, clinking glasses with another, a radiant smile never leaving his face. For him, this wasn't a funeral rite, but a coronation. He was celebrating the end of suffering and the beginning of a kingly life. Sarah moved through the party like a ghost. She smiled, she nodded, but her eyes were empty. Her smile was a fragile mask ready to shatter at any moment. She looked at the neighbors happily eating and felt sick. They were eating the very price paid for her son's life. Every piece of meat they ate, every beer they drank, was bought with Leo's blood. As night fell and the last guests departed, the apartment returned to a deathly silence. Michael, tipsy and euphoric, collapsed onto the sofa. "We did it, Sarah. We finally did it." Sarah didn't answer. She went into Leo's room and sat on the floor, clutching Barnaby, the teddy bear. The room still smelled of her son. She sat there for hours in the dark, waiting for a phone call from her mother, a call that would confirm her worst nightmare had come true. She tried to stay awake, fighting the sleep that pulled at her eyelids. She told herself she had to keep watch over her son, even if only in spirit during his final hours on this earth. But eventually, physical and emotional exhaustion won. Her head drooped to her knees, and she fell into a fitful, dream-filled sleep. She was awakened by a scream. It wasn't a scream from a dream. It came from the living room, a shrill, theatrical scream of agony. "Oh, my life! Why did you leave us so soon?" Sarah stumbled out. Michael was kneeling on the floor, his head in his hands, wailing dramatically. Neighbors, awakened by the screams, were already gathering at the door. They looked at him with pity. Sarah stared at him. She felt nothing but disgust. It was the scream of a carefully staged play. He was performing for his audience, playing the part of a grief-stricken father. But then when she saw her phone on the table, the screen lit up with dozens of missed calls from Mom. Reality crashed down on her like a tidal wave. The nightmare was real. Leo was gone. A low moan escaped her throat. It wasn't a scream. It was the sound of something inside her breaking completely. Her legs gave way. The world around her spun and then faded to black. As the neighbors rushed to catch her, Michael continued his performance, crocodile tears streaming down his face. But Sarah couldn't hear him anymore. She had died with her son. The wealth had been purchased. The price had been paid. And from the ashes of their family, a new cursed life was about to begin. Leo's funeral was held on a gray, dreary day, the Ohio sky a somber shroud. The death certificate listed the cause as sudden infant death syndrome CDS, a cold and cruel medical term to cover an unexplainable truth. Friends and neighbors came to offer condolences, hugging a numb, statuesque Sarah and patting the shoulder of Michael, who played the part of a devastated father to perfection. No one suspected a thing. They only saw a terrible tragedy that had befallen an already struggling family. In the weeks that followed, their apartment was filled with a silence heavier than any scream. Michael and Sarah didn't speak. They moved past each other in the cramped space like two ghosts, each carrying their own private grief and a terrible shared secret. Michael threw himself into his work at the garage, a way to escape. Sarah sat for hours in Leo's room, clutching Barnaby the teddy bear, not crying, not speaking. She was simply rotting from the inside out. Then the money started to come. It didn't arrive in a flood, but as a steady, unstoppable tide. Everything Michael touched turned to gold. A classic car with severe damage that other garages had given up on, he fixed in a single afternoon. The owner, a wealthy collector, paid him a handsome sum and recommended him to all his friends. A lucrative maintenance contract with a local trucking company suddenly fell into his lap. Word spread. Michael the poor mechanic was now known as the Golden Hands of Havenwood. Within a few months, they had moved out of the shabby apartment complex. Michael bought a large house in a new gated community in the suburbs, a McMansion with faux columns and a perfectly manicured lawn. He bought 2 brand-new cars, a gleaming black Ford F-150 Platinum for himself, and a pearl-white Lexus SUV for Sarah. He tore down the old rented workshop and built a state-of-the-art facility called Michael's Premier Auto, with sparkling service bays and a dozen apprentices working under him. He was constantly busy and money flowed into his bank account like a river that never ran dry. And Sarah, she changed too. After the first few weeks of catatonic grief, she woke up one day and looked in the mirror. She saw a gaunt woman with hollow eyes, a shadow of her former self. And then a thought sparked in her mind, a thought as cold and sharp as a shard of ice. I paid the ultimate price. I sacrificed my child. I deserve to enjoy every single cent his blood created. That justification became her life raft. It allowed her to stop feeling guilty and start feeling entitled. She closed her small sewing shop, which was filled with painful memories of the days she taught Leo his letters. Now her only job was to be beautiful. She spent her days shopping at high-end malls in Columbus, spending tens of thousands of dollars on designer clothes, luxury handbags, shoes, and sparkling jewelry. She no longer walked the streets. They hired a maid to clean the house, a gardener to tend the lawn, and a chef to prepare their meals. Sarah's life was now a long chain of leisurely days, from spa appointments to lunches with the other wealthy women in the neighborhood. She had built a gilded cage around herself, filling the emptiness inside with luxurious things. On the surface, Michael and Sarah were an American success story. They had risen from poverty to become one of Havenwood's most influential couples. They threw lavish poolside parties donated to local charities and were admired by everyone. Their life was beautiful, everything seemed perfect. But 2 years passed, and a great void began to form in their hearts, a void that no amount of money or material possessions could fill. Their house was too quiet. 4 empty bedrooms, vast hallways that didn't echo with the sound of a child's laughter or an infant's cry. Wealth had bought them everything except the one thing they began to crave the most. In the silence of their gilded cage, the ghost of a 5-year-old boy began to grow. Michael and Sarah might have the world, but they had lost the only thing that truly mattered. And that dawning realization began to gnaw at them, heralding a new storm on the horizon. The silence in the house was no longer peaceful. It was a deafening roar. It echoed in the empty rooms, mocking their wealth. Sarah began her quest for another child, with the frantic determination of a drowning person grasping for a lifeline. She saw the best doctors, flew to top fertility clinics across the country, and spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on in vitro fertilization, genetic testing, and experimental therapies. She turned her body into a laboratory, enduring painful hormone injections and invasive procedures. But the result was always the same. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Miller," the doctors would say with well-practiced sympathy. "The damage from your previous delivery was too severe. You will never be able to carry a pregnancy to term again." Each rejection was another hammer blow to her already shattered soul. Disappointment turned to bitterness, and bitterness turned to rage. Their home, once filled with fake laughter, now echoed with shrill arguments and heavy silences. Then Sarah began to notice a change in Michael. He came home later, always faintly smelling of a strange perfume. He became obsessed with his appearance, and he barely spoke to her anymore. A betrayed wife's intuition told her the worst, but she refused to believe it, until one afternoon, as she sat alone in the vast living room, the front door suddenly opened. Michael walked in, but he wasn't alone. Beside him stood a young woman, perhaps just out of her teens, with the radiant beauty of youth. And what made Sarah freeze was the girl's round, protruding belly. She was pregnant. The girl, whose name was Amber, didn't wait for an introduction. She walked straight to the most expensive leather sofa and sat down with the smug air of a queen, as if the house already belonged to her. Sarah, stunned, turned to Michael, her voice trembling. "Michael, what the hell is going on?" Michael shrugged, his expression cold and emotionless. "Sarah, this is Amber, my new wife, and the mother of my future children. As you can see, she can get pregnant, something you, after all the money I've wasted, could never manage. I've had enough." "Your money?" Sarah screamed, the pain and outrage exploding. "Have you forgotten what I had to sacrifice for us to get this money? Have you lost your mind? You're a monster, Michael. A monster." But that was only the beginning of the nightmare. Amber, with the cruelty of youth, took over the house. She ordered the maid not to listen to Sarah. She locked the kitchen door. Sarah, the woman who once spent thousands of dollars a day, now had to sell her designer items just to have money for food. The ultimate humiliation came when Michael kicked her out of their master bedroom so Amber could move in. That was the last straw. That night, Sarah stood before Michael, her eyes swollen from crying. "You forced me to sacrifice our only child, knowing full well I could never have another," she whispered. "And now you treat me like trash. You're taking everything from me, even the money that was bought with my own son's blood. You are evil. But I promise you, you won't get away with this. I will make you pay." Michael just sneered. "Oh, give it a rest, Sarah. You can't do anything. And don't say 'my son' as if he wasn't my son too. You're the one who agreed because you loved me too much to lose me. Remember?" He turned his back and slammed the door. That night, Sarah didn't sleep. She lay in the guest room, replaying every pain, every humiliation. Then in the darkness, a cold decision formed. He would pay, and he would never know what hit him. A few weeks later, she drove the Lexus SUV back down the familiar dirt road. The log cabin was still there, silent and foreboding. The elder looked at her without surprise, as if he had been expecting her. "Elder," she said, her voice frighteningly steady, "my husband has stolen all the wealth we gained from our son's blood. He has betrayed me. I want him to pay. I want him to suffer. I am willing to pay any price. I want my share. I want my own fortune. I am ready to sacrifice again." The elder watched her intently. "My daughter, what you ask for is profound. To gain wealth again, you must sacrifice the one you love most. Are you ready?" Sarah looked up, her eyes burning with a hellish fire. "If I could sacrifice my son, I can sacrifice anyone. Tell me what the spirits want." The elder closed his eyes. When he opened them again, his voice was chillingly calm. "The spirits demand your husband's life." Sarah's heart pounded, not with fear, but with a wild, savage joy. Finally, justice would be served. "I accept," she said. The elder's instructions were simple. "Bring me a bull and a picture of your husband. Then kill the bull and throw a great feast at your home. That night your husband will fall asleep and never wake up. He will die in the exact same way your son died." Sarah sold the last of her valuables, bought a bull, and secretly took it with Michael's photo to the elder. The ritual was performed. She hid the bull at a nearby farm. On the chosen day, she waited for Michael and Amber to leave the house. Immediately, she had the bull brought over and the party began. Barbecued meat music laughter echoing through the wealthy neighborhood. About 2 hours later, Michael drove up. He heard the music from a distance, saw people coming and going from his house. He stormed in furious. "What the hell is going on here?" Sarah stepped forward, smiling. A smile that sent a chill down Michael's spine. "My love," she said sweetly, "remember when you said I couldn't do anything well surprise? I went back to see the elder. I wanted my share. And guess what? The spirits demanded the person I loved most. And that person, once upon a time, was you." Michael backed away, his face white. "No, you can't." "Go check for yourself," she said, nodding toward the backyard. "The bull has been killed. The ritual is complete." Michael ran frantically toward the backyard. At the same moment, Sarah slipped out the front door and drove away. She knew that if he confirmed her words were true, he would kill her. When the women in the kitchen confirmed that a bull had been slaughtered for the party, Michael collapsed. "I'm dead. She's killed me." He ran to David's house crying as he told him everything. They rushed to see the elder. Michael fell to his knees begging, "Please, elder, I don't want to die. Save me." The elder shook his head. "My son, if you had come before the bull was dead, I might have been able to help. But it is too late now. You are a walking corpse. Nothing can change it. You should have treated your wife better." That night, Michael tried to stay awake. He drank coffee, paced the room, fighting off sleep. But in the end, fate found him. He collapsed and never woke up. The next morning, Sarah returned. She heard crying. She walked in and saw Michael's body on the bed. Amber was sobbing beside him. Sarah didn't shed a tear. She threw Amber out of the house, buried Michael a few days later, and took full control of their assets. She opened a high-end fashion boutique, bigger and more glamorous than anything she had ever dreamed of. Money flowed back into her pockets. But as she stood alone in her luxurious shop, looking at her reflection in the large mirrors, Sarah didn't see a successful woman. She saw a lonely woman shackled by a pact she could never break. The wealth had returned, but her happiness was forever stained by guilt and loneliness. The victory was empty because on her path of revenge, she had lost her son, her husband, and her own humanity. The final question remained echoing in the silence of her life. Is wealth worth losing one's soul? And does revenge truly bring release?